The moving truck pulled away, leaving Lily and Mark standing in the overgrown front yard of their new home. The old house loomed before them, its weathered wooden siding and peeling paint giving it a tired but somehow inviting aura. The realtor had called it a fixer-upper with character, but to Lily it felt like a new beginning, a quiet escape from the noise and stress of the city. The couple spent the afternoon unloading boxes, their laughter echoing through the empty rooms. Mark joked about the creaky floorboards and the way the wind whistled through the gaps in the windows, but Lily swore she could feel something else in the air, something subtle and unsettling. As night fell, they collapsed onto an old mattress they'd set up in the living room, too exhausted to assemble their bed frame. Just as Lily was drifting off, the first whisper of sound reached her ears, faint, rhythmic scratching, like something dragging claws slowly across the other side of the wall. She sat up, listening. "Mark," she murmured, nudging him awake. "Do you hear that?" Mark exhaled sharply, groggy. "Probably just rats," he muttered, rolling over. Old house like this, bound to have critters. Lily wanted to believe him. But as the scratching continued, soft, insistent, she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just animals. It sounded deliberate, almost purposeful, like whatever was making that noise knew they were listening. She stared at the darkened hallway leading to the rest of the house, her fingers tightening around the blanket. Tomorrow, she'd insist they check for pests. For now, though, she lay back down, the sounds growing louder as the house settled around them. The scratching had become impossible to ignore. What had started as faint, sporadic noises behind the walls now echoed through the house like the relentless scraping of talons against wood. Lily lay awake each night, her body tense, straining to pinpoint the source. Some nights it sounded like it was coming from beneath the floorboards. Other times it seemed to move, creeping up the walls like something was crawling inside them. One morning, she discovered the first marks. Thin, jagged lines streaked across the hallway wallpaper, as though something had raked its claws down the surface. The grooves were shallow but unmistakable. When she showed Mark, he frowned and ran his fingers over them. "Probably just the house settling, or maybe some pests got in," he muttered. His dismissive tone made her stomach twist. "Lily, this place is old, these things happen." But they didn't just happen. The scratches multiplied. Every morning fresh lines appeared, on doorframes, the baseboards, even the ceiling. Once she swore she saw them forming in real time, the wallpaper splitting open as though an invisible hand were peeling it apart. Mark still refused to acknowledge it. Then came the feeling of being watched. It started as a prickling at the back of her neck, a sense that she wasn't alone. She'd turn quickly, catching only fleeting shadows in the corners of her vision. At night, she began waking to the sensation of breath against her skin, the faintest whisper of movement beside the bed. Mark slept soundly through it all, but Lily knew. Something was in the house with them, and it was getting closer. The attic smelled of mildew and dust, the wooden floorboards creaking ominously under Lily's weight as she climbed the narrow staircase. She had been searching for extra blankets when she noticed the loose floorboard near the far corner. Curiosity gnawed at her as she pried it open, revealing a small, leather-bound journal tucked beneath it. The cover was cracked with age, the edges frayed, as if it had been hidden in a hurry. Lily's breath hitched as she flipped through the brittle pages. The handwriting was frantic, the ink blotched in places as though the writer's hand had been shaking. The entries spoke of sleepless nights, of scratching sounds that echoed through the halls, growing louder with each passing evening. The previous tenant, a man named Elias, wrote of shadows that slithered along the walls, of invisible fingers dragging across his skin in the dark. His words chilled her to the bone. It's not just rats, it's something else, something that wants in. As she reached the last entry, her hands trembled. The writing was barely legible, the letters jagged and desperate. "It's inside the walls. It's watching me. It calls itself the Scratcher. Oh God, I can hear it right now." The sentence ended abruptly, the pen's final stroke dragging across the page like a claw mark. Lily's heart pounded. She had dismissed the noises as her imagination, but now she knew. Something was in the house with them. And if Elias's journal was any indication, it had no intention of letting them leave. Lily woke to the sound of Mark muttering in his sleep, his voice guttural and unfamiliar. She reached out to shake him awake, but the moment her fingers brushed his shoulder, his eyes snapped open, black and glassy, like polished obsidian. His lips twisted into a grin too wide for his face, and when he spoke, the words came out in a discordant rasp, as if two voices fought for control of his throat. "You shouldn't have read the journal," he said, fingers twitching against the sheets like spiders testing their legs. Lily recoiled, her breath hitching as the scent of damp earth filled the room. By morning, Mark seemed normal again, though distant, his movements sluggish and clumsy. When Lily pressed him about the night before, he blinked at her blankly, claiming he didn't remember waking up. But later, as he changed his shirt, she saw them 5 jagged gashes running down his back, fresh and glistening. They weren't just scratches, they were deliberate, deep enough to draw blood but precise, like symbols carved into flesh. Mark swore he hadn't felt a thing, even as Lily's hands trembled while dabbing at the wounds. That night, the scratching in the walls became a frenzy, as if something was tearing through the house's bones. Lily jolted upright to find Mark's side of the bed empty. She followed the sound of whispers to the hallway, where he stood facing the wall, dragging his own nails down the peeling wallpaper. His fingers left streaks of red behind, his voice a monotone chant, "Let me in, let me in, let me in." When she grabbed his arm, his head snapped toward her, eyes rolling back to reveal vined whites. The last thing she heard before fainting was laughter. Not Mark's, but something ancient, echoing from the walls themselves. Lily's hands trembled as she clutched the journal, its brittle pages whispering secrets she wished she'd never uncovered. The scratches on the walls had deepened overnight, gouged into the plaster like desperate pleas. Mark's vacant stare and the wounds on his back, wounds he couldn't explain, drove her to the village's crumbling archive, where an elderly historian named Elias sat surrounded by yellowed maps and dusty ledgers. His eyes darkened when she mentioned the house. Elias sighed, rubbing his temples as if the memory pained him. That land was never meant for the living, he confessed. Centuries ago, it had been a forgotten prison, a place where the condemned were left to rot in pitch-black cells. The worst of them all was a man known only as the Scratcher, a murderer whose madness had festered in isolation. He'd spent his dying days clawing at the stone walls, his fingernails tearing away, his voice raw from screaming curses. When the prison was demolished, his cell, and his remains, were buried beneath the earth, sealed but never silenced. Lily's breath hitched. And the house? Elias's gaze was heavy, built right over his grave. Every few decades someone moves in, and every time the scratching starts again. The Scratcher doesn't just haunt, he hungers. He needs a body to wear to feel alive again. His voice dropped to a whisper. Your husband isn't himself anymore, is he? Lily's blood turned to ice. She thought of Mark's hollow laughter, the way his fingers twitched like they were itching to dig into something. Or someone. The historian's words echoed in her mind as she fled back to the house, the weight of the truth pressing down on her. The Scratcher wasn't just in the walls, he was already inside Mark, and if she didn't act fast, she'd be next. Lily's breath came in ragged gasps as she bolted for the front door, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. The scratching had escalated into a cacophony of nails dragging across wood, metal, and glass. A sound that seemed to come from every direction at once. She grabbed the doorknob, twisting it frantically, but it refused to budge. The locks had all clicked shut on their own. She threw her weight against the door, screaming for help, but the thick wood didn't so much as creak. The temperature in the house plummeted, her breath visible in the air as she turned to face the living room. The walls pulsed, bulging inward as though something was pressing against them from the other side. Then, with a sickening tear, long, skeletal fingers broke through the wallpaper, clawing at the air. Shadowy figures oozed from the gaps, their hollow eyes fixed on her. Their mouths stretched open in silent screams, their limbs contorted and twitching as they dragged themselves forward. Lily stumbled backward, her back hitting the wall, only to feel something cold and sharp rake down her spine. She whirled around to see Mark standing there, but it wasn't him anymore. His eyes were black voids, his mouth twisted into a grin too wide for his face. You can't leave, he rasped, his voice layered with something inhuman. The Scratcher needs you. She dodged past him, sprinting for the kitchen, but the windows there were sealed shut, the glass frosted over with creeping black veins. The shadows closed in, their fingers brushing her arms, her hair, their whispers filling her ears. Begging, demanding, pulling. Lily screamed as the darkness swallowed her. The last thing she saw was the walls closing in, the house itself alive and hungry. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. Inside, the scratching finally stopped. The house stood silent once more, waiting. The house stood silent and still, its weathered facade hiding the horrors within. The front yard was overgrown, the windows dark and lifeless, as if the building itself was holding its breath. A for sale sign swayed gently in the breeze, the only indication that the property was available, and cheap. Too cheap. A young couple, Sarah and Jake, pulled up in their beat-up car, their faces alight with excitement. They'd been searching for months for a place they could afford, and this house, with its sprawling land and rustic charm, seemed like a dream come true. The realtor had been vague about the previous occupants, mentioning only that they'd moved out suddenly. Sarah didn't care. She was already imagining the life they'd build here. That first night, as they unpacked boxes by candlelight, the electricity wouldn't be turned on until tomorrow. Sarah paused. Did you hear that? She whispered. Jake frowned, listening. At first, there was nothing. Then, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of slow, deliberate scratching from somewhere inside the walls. Jake waved it off. Probably just mice. Old house like this bound to have a few. But Sarah wasn't convinced. The sound was too rhythmic, too purposeful. It didn't scurry like an animal, it dragged, like something with too many joints. As they settled into bed, the scratching grew louder, closer. Sarah clutched Jake's arm, her heart pounding. "That's not mice," she breathed. Jake sighed, pulling her close. "We'll call an exterminator tomorrow." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them from the dark corners of the room. By morning, the house was silent again, too silent. Sarah almost convinced herself she'd imagined it. Almost. Then, as she passed the hallway mirror, she caught a glimpse of something behind her. A shadowy figure with long, skeletal fingers pressed against the wall. When she turned, there was nothing there. But the scratching had already begun again. And this time, it was coming from inside the bedroom.